Welcome to Unit 1, Lecture 1. So this year is broken down into different kinds of units which will incorporate multiple chapters. In this first unit and in this first lecture, we're talking about ecology and its interactions. We're talking about different ways that the environment interacts with the organisms that live there. We're going to start, if you remember this picture of the hierarchy of life, either from your textbook or the first lecture that we watched in class, you can see that this is all broken up into different levels. Scientists like to classify things and like to put things in boxes. And so for this period of time, we are really focusing on, hey, it didn't write. Well, there we go. Okay, we're focusing on this area of the hierarchy. So remember, the biosphere over here is our largest, and the atom is the smallest. And here at cell, this is where we actually see life for the first time. But when we're talking about the stuff that we're really discussing in this particular unit, this area, the ecosystem, community, and population, is where we're going to be spending most of our time. Couple of things to remember if you forgot or if you never knew. Abiotic means something that was never alive. A rock, soil, air, water, all of that stuff. It's non-living, it never was living. Okay. And then biotic is anything that was living or is still living. So dead animals are technically classified as biotic things. Even though they're not actually living anymore, they were, and they still have the chemical makeup of a living thing. So that's really why they still categorize them as biotic factors. An ecosystem is all of the biotic and abiotic factors together. So in the ecosystem up here, we're looking at all the living and non-living things and how they interact with each other. We're also going to talk about biogeochemical cycles when we talk about the ecosystem, but we're going to touch a little bit more on those in the next unit when we actually start getting into some of the other processes associated with the environment. Community is where we're just talking about a bunch of different biotic factors. So animals, plants, bacteria, all of those things. So if we were to think about I-105 as an ecosystem, the desks, the floor, the chairs, the students, me, the bacteria that's living in there, any class pets, okay, that's the actual ecosystem. The community would be you, me, any bacteria that's in there, anything that's alive, but all of the different living things. And then the population, okay, would be all of the one type of biotic factor, so usually one species that we're looking at. So in the case of I-105, the species humans, okay, that would be a population, the humans of I-105. Okay, so if you remember this, this is, like I said, this is a little bit of review from the last or the first lecture. Okay, so we're going to keep building on these three levels for the most part. In your notebook or your computer, wherever you happen to be taking notes right now, I want you to take a look at this picture, and I want you to list all of the different biotic or abiotic factors that you see in this picture. Okay, I'm going to give you a minute. It shouldn't take you that long, so I'm going to give you a minute to do that. So that wasn't quite a minute, but if you feel like you need more time, by all means, pause the video, take some time. Okay, that's one of the joys of having this as a video recording instead of me being in class. All right, standing in front of you going over this. You have time to pause, rewatch, do whatever you need to do. So some of the biotic factors that you see here, okay, some of the biotic factors, we've got the flower, the gopher, at least I think it's a gopher, or a groundhog, something along those lines. You've got a goat. Okay. And then you've got all of this green stuff, whatever this vegetation might be. So we've got some grasses, looks like some moss. All right. So those are the different biotic factors. So abiotic factors, and I'll use a different color. Ooh, purple, that'll work. All right. We've got the air. So we can't really see the air, but we know it has to be there. You've got the snow, the rocks. So both these rocks, and then of course you've got rocks in the mountains. Okay. And then you've got rain here. Right? So all of those things are abiotic factors. All right, and so when we're talking about this ecosystem, we're talking about how these different pieces of a puzzle start playing together. And when it comes to an ecosystem, very typically it is some of these abiotic factors that actually impact the biotic factors. Okay, so what kind of abiotic factors we have, all right, influences what kind of biotic factors can live there. Ecology, at its base, remember, ology means to study. Ology is to study, and then eco is the environment. We're studying the interactions of these different levels: organisms, populations, communities, and ecosystems. Now, very rarely do we talk just about an individual organism. It's usually in the scope of a population. But sometimes we are interested in how individual organisms, especially when we're talking about interactions within a population. So, but very rarely do we talk about like an organism by itself, but it's usually how organisms within populations react with each other. And these interactions can happen in a couple of different ways that we're going to talk a lot about more. We have this interspecific competition. So interspecific means between different members of different species. Okay, and I actually think I want a brighter color now. Okay, so we're looking at between members of different species. Okay, so when we're thinking about interspecific, so anything that could happen between two different species, whatever they're fighting for. And then we have intraspecific competition, so that's between members of the same species. So that's where individuals of the same species, generally within the same population, are actually interacting with each other. That's where I said, like I said, we talk about, this is where, if we're going to really talk about organisms as an individual organism, that's where we're actually going to bring them up, because a lot of times we'll talk about organisms and how individual organisms within a population react. Also, part of this is studying human interactions with their environment, since we are a group of living things. We are a population, okay, and we are a living thing, and we are an animal. We are part of this. So part of ecology is not just studying the interactions with the organisms out there, it's also studying the interactions of the organisms that we are part of as well. So like I said, a lot of abiotic factors actually influence climate. So these are the big abiotic factors. Okay, so here are the big ones. So energy source, okay, and it's usually, for most environments, it's usually the sun. Okay, it's usually the sun. There are some environments where it's based on chemicals. Not all of them, very rare, but we're going to, for the most part, focus on the sun. The sun then can impact the temperature. Okay, and the other thing that the sun can impact is the amount of light. Well, obviously but the amount of light, oops, too fast, amount of light. I'll get the hang of this. Okay, the amount of light. So everybody thinks that plants react to temperature. Plants are not actually reacting to temperature. Plants are actually reacting to the amount of light they're receiving and the amount of light in a day. And so what happens to influence fall, when the leaves start to change color, or spring when the leaves start growing again, is actually a reaction to the amount of light that they're experiencing as opposed to the temperature. But sun energy does impact the temperature, and that can be important for other organisms, not just plants. The abundance and type of water. So are we getting some rain, a lot of rain, no rain? Instead of rain, do we have snow, permafrost, those kinds of things. So what kind of water do we have, and what kind of, what kind of phase it's in? So most organisms rely on liquid water. If there isn't enough liquid water to support the organism, they can't live there. Nutrients, so different environments have different kinds of nutrients, but these things right here are the big ones. Okay, these are huge. All right, and then this is actually going to determine what we call is a biome, if you remember that from middle school. Okay, those are the things that really are important for the biome. And then we can have different types of nutrients. So if anybody does any gardening or knows anybody that does, New Jersey has very characteristic soils, which made it really great for growing tomatoes. That's why tomatoes were a huge thing, a huge crop for a very long time. Okay, we have characteristic soils that are great for certain kinds of plants. So the flip side to that is that they're not great for other plants. Okay, and then we have aquatic. If you're in an aquatic environment, obviously air is hard to come by. So things that still need to breathe oxygen have had to figure out how to get it out of the water, and then depending on how they get it out of the water, how much of it is available in the water. And then there are other things. But like I said, it's the temperature and the water that really influence the plant species that can live there. And then the plant species that can live there really influence the animal species. So, like I said, biomes are determined by solar radiation. That's the big one, and precipitation, okay, which determines what kind of producers, aka plants. Okay, plants. It's another name for plants because they produce their own energy, which we're going to talk a little bit more about next unit. But those biomes are then determined a lot of times by those plants, because those plants then determine what animals can live there, because remember, plants are the basis of all food chains. All right, so here is a map of the different biomes that are on the planet. We're not really going to spend a whole lot of time talking about the individual biome, more so, or the individual biomes, but more so how they're determined. But if you notice, here's our equator. Here's our equator. Okay, and so this is where we get the most sun. All right, and then you can see the kinds of biomes that are in that region. So the tropical forest, okay, is a big one. All right, and then we end up with savannas and deserts, and a lot of this also relates to wind patterns and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that go into it, but just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Like I said, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on biomes, but biomes are defined by their abiotic factors and their biotic factors because they work together, and we can look at these patterns, and then these patterns end up helping us understand how the environment works. Okay, so that's it. This was a little bit of a long one, but not so bad. Here's your wrap up. So what you guys need to do is you need to go to Blackboard, and you need to post on the discussion board your answer to these 3 questions. So what is the average temperature and precipitation for Washington Township in March, June, September, and December? So if you notice, spring, summer, fall, winter, covering all our seasons there. Okay, and then what biome is Washington Township part of, and what are the main producers here? So what, if you go look outside, what are the producers that you see? What kind of producers? Okay, the one thing is I want to tell you is, just in case, if you're trying to search for something, Washington Township might not work, but Sewell will. Okay, so if you look up Sewell, that'll help you out too. Okay, so you're going to go to Blackboard after you figure out your answers to these questions, and you're going to post there. It is graded, so you got to make sure you answer that question. All right, see you soon.